Hi everyone, my name is Maribel. Today we're going to be building our very own lizard. But before we get started on the building, let's try to understand how a lizard moves so we can recreate that in our build. So where do you usually see lizards? They live in the wild, some people have them as pets. And what do you know about their bodies? They're often green. They walk with 4 legs, but they're known for having very long tongues. So today in our build, we're going to be making sure that our lizard looks just like a real lizard by having it have a really long tongue. And we're going to be using a new piece today in order to create that movement. Do you want to guess which piece in front of you is going to help us to recreate a lizard? We're going to be using the rack. Now the rack is very important because it allows us to create a new movement with the gears. So we call this movement the rack and pinion, where the rack is at the bottom and the pinion is the gear that is placed vertically on top of it. Now what do you think this is going to allow us to do? It allows us to turn the vertical motion of the gear, so it's going vertically in a circle, and it allows us to turn that motion into horizontal motion. So as the gear is turning, our rack is able to go horizontally side to side. So if we want to create the tongue of our lizard and make it look as realistic as possible, we're going to want to use these gears to push the rack forward and backwards so that the tongue of our lizard can go in and out. So we'll be using the rack and pinion model in our build today. We'll build the lizard and then we'll construct the programming that's going to help us to move the tongue in and out. So first we'll work on setting up the gears for the tongue of our lizard. So we'll be building all the gears around the rack. Then for the second part, we'll build the entire body of the lizard. And then for the third part, we're going to make the program to make our lizard move. So with that being said, let's make sure you have all your pieces out in front of you and we'll get started with the build. So to begin, take a size 11 beam, put a pin with ridge in the 5th hole from the top, and then put 3 more pinwheel ridges on the bottom 3 pinholes, making sure to put the longest side in so that the pinwheel ridge goes out on either end. Now taking a 2x4 angular beam, clip the last 2 into the bottom pinholes of your angular beam so the longest side is facing towards the ceiling and the shortest end is pointed towards the other 2. And then taking a 3x5 angular beam, you'll clip that onto the other 2 pinwheel ridges, making sure that the shortest end is pointed towards the sky. Now taking an axle 7 and an axle 3, put the axle 3 through the first pinhole, grab your rack, and you're going to slide that in Once you've put the 2 angular beams, we're going to work on the rack. So we're going to place the rack right on top of our size 11 beam, and we're going to grab axle 3 and put it through the top pinhole of your 3x5 angular beam, and grab a size 7 axle and put that through the first pinhole of your 2x4 angular beam. So I'm not putting it into the cross hole. And you have your rack under. Now take 2 double bevel gears of size 16 and put them into the axle so that it's laying right on top of the rack. So these two bevel gears will work as the pinions for our rack. Make sure they're laid on top so that every time you move your rack, you should see both your bevel gears moving. Now taking a 2x4 angular beam and a 3x5, you're going to secure it on the other end. So you can just place these two angular beams just like you did before. So the axles have gone in through both angular beams on each side. So it's a lot more secured now. And so we have our rack in place. We have the pinions in place. Do you know why we need the beam at the bottom? Every rack, in order to get it to work, needs a slide at the bottom. That way we can move our rack back and forth. So whenever you're using the rack, you're going to need a smooth surface right under it so that we're able to push it back and forth. So that completes that step. Now take two full bushings and just secure your axle 7 on each side. Now you're going to put that aside, grab your axle 2, place it into the cross hole of your motor, and grab a size 16 double bevel gear to place it right on. Now grab two black pins and place them on each of the two pinholes on both sides of your motor. Grab a T-beam and put that along the two black pins on only one side, because then you're going to take an axle 10 and another double bevel gear of size 16. Line the bevel gear on the side where you have your T-beam and insert your axle 10 through your bevel gear and through the T-beam. So that way your both bevel gears are touching. And then we can secure the other end with the remaining T-beam. So that's going to be the base for our motor. Now you're going to put that aside, grab your frame, and put black pins on the top two pinholes and the bottom pinhole. So you're only using 3 pins. Grab a double pin connector and put black pins in both pinholes. And now you're going to connect your pinhole to your frame. That it clips in just like that. And this part's a little tricky, but now we're going to put and position our frame so that it connects both our rack and our motor. So you're going to want to sit your motor on top. We're going to want to clip in the frame to the side. The two bottom black pins, the ones on the pin connector, are going to go into the angular beam, and the two closest pins on the frame will go onto the sides of the motor. So I'm going to clip it in. Just make sure they're all positioned with all of the appropriate pinholes. So you might have to move your motor a little bit back or a little bit forward so that all the black pins can go in. And it just fit in smoothly like that. And notice that I have my T-beam inside my frame. So that's going to be one side of covering the motor. And you're going to do the exact same thing so we can border up the other side of our motor. So again, take a frame, 5x7, and a double pin connector, placing the black pins in the same place. So the two top pinholes and the bottom pinhole. And then take two black pins into your double pin connector. Clip that onto your frame. And then just stick that onto the other side of your motor. And that's going to secure our motor. So now we can get started. We have the rack in place. We have all our bevel gears built. So that completes the first part of the build. And now we're going to go on and build the rest of the lizard's body. And then we're going to program. So we're going to first give our lizard some eyes. So put 2 half bushings on either side of your axle number 7. Now take both hubs and put that on either side of your axle 10 and put it right up against the frame. So you go right as far back as you can, up against the frame. Now grab 2 of your white elastics. You want to make sure they're the white ones so that they fit right. And you're going to put it along the frame of the hub and connect that with the bushing that's closest to your angular beam, so the innermost bushing. Make sure that it fits around the hub. That's going to help secure our pieces so that they move a lot more smoothly. So do the same on the other side. So you got your 2 elastics in. Now take your double bevel gears of size 36 and put them on each side of your axle 10. And now you're going to grab 2 3x5 angular beams and 2 2x4 angular beams, as well as 2 black pins. Put black pins on the last pinhole from the shortest end of your angular beam. Do that for both. So notice how I have my black pins. And then connect the shortest end of your 2x4 angular beam that the last pinhole on the short end will go into, so that the shortest end is pointing in the opposite direction. So just make sure you have all the positionings right. And then we're going to attach this to the bottom of our lizard. So you're going to turn your lizard over. And you're going to want to clip it in so that the angular beam, the 2x4 angular beam, points towards the tongue. So you're going to clip the double pin connector into the bottom and 3rd pinhole. And make sure you have them on the right side. So I flipped mine over because you want to make sure that your angular beam, your 3x5 angular beam, is underneath your 2x4 angular beam. And that they're pointed, the white angular beam is pointed away from the body, while your 2x4 are pointed inwards. That's going to complete that step. Now, take your double angular beam, put an axle 2 in the cross hole of the shortest side of your double angular beam, put an axle 3 in the other remaining cross hole, and now grab your 2x4 angular beam and put that into the axle 2 that goes through the cross hole, and the shortest end is pointing towards the double angular beam. Now taking your 3x5 angular beam, you're going to attach that to the front of, or the back end of your lizard. So to do that, grab 2 pin with ridges, stick it through the first pinhole that's sticking out and the third pinhole that's sticking out. So now you can clip on your first angular beam. So we have it on one side. And now you can clip on the tail of your lizard. So you're going to want to put it in So you want to make sure it's positioned right by making sure that the flat end is sitting right on the table, and you're going to put it through the last pinhole at the bottom. So make sure that it's flat against the table that you're working on. So it should be touching, and then that way you can secure on the other end with your other angular beam. So when you flip it over, now we have the tail for our lizard. And all we have to do now is to add on our 2x4 angular beams. So you're going to put the black pins on to the pinholes of your angular beam. So those are the 2 free ones at the top. And then just connect your angular beams by making the shortest end facing towards the table and the longer end of the angular beam pointed towards the tongue. And there we go. We have our lizard. So we got the body, we have the tongue, and now we're going to program it so that our lizard can move its tongue in and out, and we're going to transmit that vertical force of the gear into horizontal using the rack. So let's get started on the program. The first step is we want the tongue to move outwards, and then we want it to go back. But we want our lizard to keep doing that. So for the very first step, make sure you have a loop in the program, and then we'll build the rest of the program inside the loop. So for the first block inside the loop, you're going to first put the medium motor, and we're going to do on for degrees because we're going to be controlling how many times our gear is moving. So put on for degrees. You're going to put a degree of 180, so our gears are going to turn half a circle. And for the power, put positive 20. Make sure that the port lines up with the port you're going to connect your cable to. So I'm going to connect it to cable A. So just connect your motor and make sure that your program has the same port that you have connected. And then for the next block, we want it to go back in. So which inputs are we going to put for the medium motor to have it go back in? We're going to use the medium motor block. We're going to do on for degrees. And if we want it to go back, we're still going to use 180 degrees, so we're still going to have it turn half a circle, but we want it to go in the opposite direction, so we're going to put -20, or the negative number of the input that you put in the first block. So make sure that the ports line up, that the values are positive and negative for the first and second block, and that you have the degree of 180. So that's it for the program. Once you've done that, you can upload it to your brick, and we'll test it out and see if our lizard can stick its tongue out. And just keep going because of the loop. But we see that it works, and we see, most importantly, that we're able to use the gears, and although they're rotating, we can still create our rack to go back and forth. So this is the use of the rack and the pinion, where both our pinions on the inside of the motor and on the out are able to rotate and turn that into horizontal movement. So that's why we use the rack. And we also learned that in order to use a rack, you're going to need some kind of slide, some kind of smooth plating in order to slide the rack back and forth. So that's everything for today's build. Once you're done with your model, feel free to put your pieces away, and we will see you for the next build. Bye everyone.